And the sensations of what I now understand are a panic attack started to sort of kick in, because like the person next to me was saying, I'm lucky to be sat here. I wanted to kill myself last night. I never went down the medication route. I think if I was an 18-year-old now and I'd experienced, this crippling anxiety, I think I would have been a lot more open to the idea of medication. Still very much lost in terms of like trying to figure out who the hell I was. Like a concept, the sheer thought of that ego having an inch of vulnerability terrified me more than anything. I'd often turn to music as a source of salvation. There's of course this voice at the back of my mind that's like, holy shit, Mike, you're going to be in front of hundreds of people, and in order to become the person that you want to be, you have to shed that skin, and that skin is full of self-doubt and anxiety.
All right. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the Never Fully Heard podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Cheers, mate. I appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah, good to see you. So, where I want to start is the beginning of your journey with mental health. So, when did you first understand what mental health even was?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, really, mate. I was about 18 years old, and at the time, I'd gone to work for quite a big bank in the UK, and I was doing this scheme where basically you work full time and you do a degree alongside working full time as well, um, which is obviously insanely hard. Like it wasn't easy, and I think it was initially like taking on all that stress of like I'd be working a 9 to 5 in the bank and then have to go home and study. Um, as we know, like stress can often lead to anxiety, and I think that was my first real bout of really understanding like what mental health and like this word anxiety even was. Um, I remember, I used to have to, it was about an hour and 20 my commute to get to work, which wasn't nice at all. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like I was on the second leg of that, like the second train. And the sensations of what I now understand are a panic attack started to sort of kick in. I was like, this is weird. Like, am I excited? Am I like, what's going on? And then very quickly realized, you know, I was in some deep waters. And that unfortunately led to it, sometimes you can often find with panic attacks and the anxiety response, like specific situations can like trigger it. Like you can build quite a habit of being in a particular environment that will trigger it. And it always became this particular train that I'd be on. And every morning I'd get, what I now understand, like I said, was the sensations of a panic attack. But at the time, I just didn't know what was happening to me. And I'd get that stressed out. Sometimes I'd have to get off the train, go to the train toilets and like throw up. Um, my sort of the amount of times that I'd be late to work was getting to a point where my manager started to ask like, what's going on? Is everything okay? And I didn't really understand how to explain what was going on because I didn't realize that I was experiencing some pretty severe anxiety, until one day I just sort of went home and I spoke to mom and I said, look, like, this is happening to me. Do you know what it is? And straight away she was like, okay, you're experiencing anxiety. So that really, mate, was my first experience of mental health. The first time that I really understood what anxiety was. The first time I understood that you can be deeply affected by the things that go on inside your own head. Up until that point in my life, um, from what I can remember, things have been pretty plain sailing.
So interesting that became the trigger, that exact train ride, and that ended up causing it each time.
Exactly, exactly. And like, what's crazy to think is like, obviously, there's nothing inherently threatening about me being sat on that train at that point in time. But I think because the first few times it had happened, when I was on that train, my brain had just built this habit of, right, this is where we have these panic attacks, you know. And what's interesting about that story is like, obviously, I was 18 years old, and the data and like sort of hearing people talk about mental health now, you often find that it's sort of like much more widely spoken about in schools. Like there's teenagers of a much younger age are experiencing it. And from what I can remember, so we're going back sort of, 10 years ago, I would have been 18. So maybe like 15 years ago when I was sort of like 12 and whatever, mental health wasn't like, we didn't have mental health like lessons in school. Like people didn't come in and say, this is what anxiety is, this is what depression is. Whereas now, like, as I'm sure you're aware, like kids are suffering.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing. It's having spoken to some people that have never experienced anxiety or depression to any kind of large extent, they can't really understand just how intense a panic attack can feel, though. But people often mistake it for like a heart attack, and it can be totally debilitating. It's so fascinating to me that your thoughts can cause such a like physical reaction. I mean, stress is like one of the biggest causes of like illnesses or in the US and the UK and certain Western countries. And all stress is your thoughts. It's not actually like nothing is stressful. It's how you are taking something on. So interesting. What did you do to first address your anxiety?
So it was an interesting one. So fortunately, through the bank, I was able to get like health insurance and stuff. So when eventually it got to the point where my manager was saying like, what's going on with you? At one point, she asked, "Are you on drugs?" I don't know what she meant by that statement, but obviously my behaviour must have been that erratic, sort of constantly showing up to work late in like hot flushes of sweat whenever I was getting to work. Um, she was like, what's going on? And I was like, no, I'm not on drugs, Ruth. I'm, I think I'm experiencing, some pretty severe anxiety. And she was like, okay, well, this is what we can do from, work's perspective. We can sort of source out some therapy for you and things like that. So the first thing I went and did was I went and got some group therapy, which, again, just talking from personal experience, didn't really do me any favors. And the reason why that was is because I'd be put in a room. I'd go there sort of, I think it was once every Tuesday, like in the afternoon. So I'd finish work early and off I went. And I'd get put in this room with people who were, there was like also like this like hospital there as well. So there was people there who were, they'd been put into this hospital because they were either a threat to others or like a serious threat to themselves. They were on the verge of suicide and not necessarily a threat to others, sorry, but they were, pretty much on the verge of suicide. And so I'd be put in a room with these people, and we'd sort of do, these exercises where we go around the room and talk about our experience, maybe how we're feeling and stuff. And it really caused me to minimize what I was going through because, like, the person next to me was saying, I'm lucky to be sat here. I wanted to kill myself last night, and I'm like, well, I have panic attacks on the train to work. Like, like in my mind, I was like, come on, Mike, like, fuck me. Look, things could be a lot worse, but that really didn't do me any favors because it just caused me to minimize my own suffering and what I was going through, which I now understand is the worst thing you can do. You should never compare your own experience to somebody else's. So group therapy, in my experience, didn't really work out for me, and I tried. I never went down the medication route. I think if I was an 18-year-old now and I'd experienced, this crippling anxiety, I think I would have been a lot more open to the idea of medication just because there's a lot of like really encouraging movements on Instagram and stuff. I'm sure you've seen Dr. Alex George, I think his name is, who's sort of like, he runs this like post your pill and like people openly talk about the medication they're on for the mental health and stuff. Whereas 10 years ago, when I was going through it, the idea of medication to me just made me feel like, oh no, obviously this isn't fact or anything, but like I was like, that's a sign of weakness. Like there's no way in hell I'd go on medication. And again, we can get into the stigma around all that sort of stuff later on in the podcast, man. But that played a big role in sort of why medication was completely shut off to me. So I was trying, like herbal remedies, like you can you can drink like teas that supposedly calm down anxiety. Like all, I tried to get hypnotized, which I know can work for people, but in my experience, it didn't work. And then the one thing that really got things moving for me was a book called Dare, um, by Barry McDonagh. I think that's a is an Irish bloke. Um, yeah, it's called Dare by Barry McDonagh, and it's really interesting because I tried so much, and then it like these are just words on a piece of paper that just managed to just 1% in my mind just reframe the way that I was looking at anxiety. And there's actually an acronym. It stands for diffuse, accept, run towards, and engage. So what you do is, if you start to feel the sensations of anxiety coming on, straight away you diffuse the thoughts that you're having. So like I realise when I'd be on the train to work in the morning, for example, if I really dissected what was going on in my mind, I was getting anxious about work. I was in a job that, if I'm honest with you, like really didn't align with my values. I wasn't enjoying what I did. I was a cashier in a bank, and then also moving on to being like a personal banker as well. And it just, for me, it wasn't. It just didn't make me get out of bed in the morning and really enjoy what I went and did. And I'd always sort of panic that I'd give the wrong information to customers, worry about sort of having conversations with customers because 9 times out of 10, I didn't really know what I was on about, to be honest, which isn't easy when you're working in like such a high pressured environment. So I'd have these things in the back of my mind on the train to work, like, oh, what if you mess up the morning meeting? What if, you say that you have a really bad conversation with the customer or stuff. And my first reaction would, if I was implementing the dare response, diffuse, would just be, so what? So what if I mess up the morning meeting? It's not the end of the world. I'm not going to lose my job over it. It's okay. If I have a bad conversation, okay, so what? I'm not going to lose my job over not having the information for a customer. I can just go and find someone who does. Like, but our brains have a way of maximizing these worries to being catastrophic events that we think are going to be the end of our lives. But if you really rationalize them, they're not. And then I'd take this one step further as well, mate, which I found to be, this method was really powerful for this like diffuse part of this whole acronym. And what I'd do is, if I had a particular worry about an event that was coming up or particular worries that were coming up over the next week, I'd write down all the worries, every last worry that I had, as many as I could conjure up in my mind. And then I'd let that event happen. So it could be something as simple as like, the next day at work, I'd write down all my worries. I'd let that event happen. And then I'd revisit all of these worries that were written down. They didn't happen. They didn't happen. And then every time I'd do that, 1% more every time, it just got that little bit easier to diffuse those worries because I had physical evidence in front of me that my brain was just chatting bollocks, like these things aren't going to happen. So that's, yeah, man, literally. So that's kind of the first step, is diffusing the thoughts that come up. After that, you've got to accept, and accepting is basically, you know, I anyone that's experienced anxiety who's listening to this, we all know that the first thing that we do when we experience a bit of anxiety is we run it. We go, oh, no, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel this way, and we resist it. Yeah, we suppress it, we resist it, we try and get away from it, and the accept part of the dare response flips that on its head. You say, right, okay, you're back again. Well, do your worst. I'm going to accept you for what you are. And there was this one statement in the book that really resonated with me. It was, you say to your anxiety, you know, I created you. I will work through this with you. We're in this together. Like you end up owning your anxiety. You're like, right, you're a part of me, and we're going to figure this out. And it even just reading that, just that little tiny little flick in my mind, it was just an alternative way of looking at it. And I was like, fuck, okay. So let's start just accepting it when it comes up. And obviously it's still very uncomfortable. Like no one likes the tight stomach, the heart racing, the sweaty hands, but you just accept it and you say, okay, well, just do your worst. And that creates a gap in your mind where, because what would work me up to a panic attack was running away from it and resisting it, because like I'm resisting it, I feel more anxious. I'm resisting it, I feel more anxious, and these blocks would build up into a panic attack. But when I was just accepting of it, the blocks didn't really build up into a panic attack. Still felt anxious. It was all still there, but I wasn't getting off the train and having to throw up anymore. um,
It seems like you really, really know that process, and you've really done the work to. Quite often with personal development, I found it with this myself and seeing other people, is like you often it's described as like people go snorkeling, they don't go scuba diving. But it seems like you found that tactic and you went deep on it. Did you? Was that like a really conscious thing? Like, I'm just going to do this. Once you found that 1%, I'm going to do this until it I really solve it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That nail on the head, mate. Exactly. Literally that. It was just a case of forcing myself into environments all the time that would trigger anxiety, but consciously making an effort to embody this approach. And every time it was hell. I'm not going to lie to you, but every time it got 1% easier, 1% easier to manage until eventually, you know, I mean, look, I still experience anxiety now. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have a grip on my life like it used to. You know.
I think that's gonna. I mean, I'm definitely gonna listen to this back and dive into that book because I mean, I still experience it to this day, even though I've gone through therapy and I know how to manage it. But I think it's a less daunting thing for people to go. I, like, all I'm gonna do is try and get this like one. I'm gonna try and deal with this one situation better. I'm gonna try and do this. It's not. I'm not gonna solve this overnight. I'm not gonna solve this instantly. It's like, but I may be able to take the edge off on this one situation. It's a lot more like, okay, this is manageable if I can just take it bit by bit.
Mate, 100%, 100%. And to be honest with you, it's something that I definitely need to get better at applying into my entire life. But without a shadow of a doubt, like I'm someone who's very guilty of if I've got an idea, if I want to do something like the podcast, for example, Unbottled, I'm like, right, I'm going to do the whole thing overnight. And like, I'll try and do everything at once. And obviously, that ends it. You end up burning out, you end up getting stressed. But like, the 1% rule can be applied to absolutely anything that you want to do. It's just like, right, okay, I want to achieve this one thing. What's going to be more manageable for me to do? 1% every day and gradually build up to that, or try and do the whole thing overnight. And of course, the answer is, 1% every single day. What is the one thing I can do that will just get me that little bit closer? And the compounding effect of that over time. If I don't know if yourself you've ever read Atomic Habits, it's yeah, like you'll know, like the compounding effect of doing that 1% every day is phenomenal, and it's manageable.
Yeah, and it's doing it without the thing that I think made the difference for me is doing it without the need to see results. Because quite often with this stuff, like even with anxiety, and there's going to be times where you may even go backwards, but it's like showing up consistently even without the results. Is the hard bit because the brain just so wants it so wants that next result.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, mate, we are unfortunately a massive victim to instant gratification. You know, it's rewired the way that we look at doing tasks, and without having those instant results, like I can order a pizza in 5 minutes. I can open my phone and scroll through Instagram. Like we've got all this instant gratification. When it comes to something like this, you're probably not going to see results straight away. It's going to take months, if not years, and that can be a really hard concept to grasp.
Especially because that will, with anxiety, if you don't see results, it feeds into the fear that, okay, oh fuck, it is going to go wrong again. Oh, it's going to,
Yeah,
I haven't
yeah,
seen
man.
results. And
Yeah,
yeah, that little voice just starts planting seeds of doubt, and you just got to just be like, oh, fuck off, mate.
yeah,
I've had
literally,
enough of you.
literally, literally.
Yeah, one thing, you mentioned you spoke to your mum about it, but when was the first time you said to your like close mates, like, fuck, I'm dealing with panic attacks?
Yeah, it took a while, man. It took a while. Um, I can't remember the exact sort of time and place, but all I remember is one of my really good mates. I think he was the first one to mention that he'd experienced a bit of anxiety. And because he'd opened that door slightly, I was like, right, well, here's what I'm going through. And, uh, and it was mad because as soon as we started talking about that, he was like, I can completely relate to what you're saying. Like I've experienced panic. And then someone else was like, yeah, like, mate, this happens to me all the time. And that in itself, to be honest with you, like obviously I've just described to you how like the Dare book helped me a lot, but just as powerful, if not more powerful, was the realization that holy shit, man, everyone else is this is happening to everyone. Like as you know, like it's so easy to isolate what you're going through. It's so easy, and then when I came to the realization that even my closest friends, who like you never think would ever go through anything like that, could completely understand what I was saying and have experienced the same thing. You're just like, right, okay, God, you're not alone. Really not alone in what you're going through. And I use this term all the time, but I managed to find peace in other people's suffering, which sounds like a bit of a mad term, but what I mean by it is like, the realization that everyone's going through it is, you can look at it in two ways. You can sit there and be like, Jesus Christ, we're in the middle of a mental health crisis. Or you can say, well, you know what, I can find some peace in that, a little bit of beauty in that, in knowing that I'm not alone and neither of those people.
It's a really nice reframing, which I think is a massive part of dealing with mental health, is just reframing the situation you're in. But it's also like it feels like a bit of personal accountability, right? If you, someone said this to me the other day, and I thought it was really interesting. If you're not vulnerable with your loved ones, then you're robbing them of a better relationship with you. Because if you're more vulnerable, you create deeper emotional connections. So a way to think about it is if you're being vulnerable, you're
Yeah,
creating better like connections, and otherwise you're robbing them of potentially knowing you better and having better experiences. So I think it's like with what you're doing with your podcast and what I'm trying to do is try and hold that space for more men to realize that if you open up, it's just a better. It's like it's better ROI. Like you're gonna get more back from it, because I think often guys like need like a
that's
personal
yeah,
development element if it involves emotions. Like, what am I going to get out of this? And that can be the relationships. Like,
so true, man, so true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think no, I really like that way of looking at it, mate. Is like, your vulnerability is a way of deepening that connection, and you owe that to your loved ones. I think that's a really powerful way of framing things, and I agree completely. Like you say, like I think men especially need to know, like, okay, well, what's in it for me if I'm going to open up my emotions like this and be vulnerable? And it's like, well, you're going to have a 10 times better relationship with your closest friend.
what were some of the thoughts that came up of like resistance when you didn't speak to your guy mates about it? What were some of the like bits of resistance that you felt?
Yeah, just the typical sort of, I'd looking back, I understand that when I was sort of like 18, 19 as well, like I was still very much lost in terms of like trying to figure out who the hell I was. Like I didn't really know who I was. I'd do a lot of things to please other people, and I'd kind of built this ego for myself. Like I loved lifting weights, not because I love lifting weights, but because it made me look a certain way. And I definitely had a bit of an ego about me when I was that age. Um, and I think it was more so the sheer concept, the sheer thought of that ego having an inch of vulnerability terrified me more than anything. Um, I didn't want people to know that Mike Wells had a weak, if that's even a word to use, like at the time I perceived it as, like this weak and vulnerable side. And I think that's what held me back from really sitting down and saying, look, boys, this is the crack. This is what I'm going through. Um, which, as I'm sure you'd agree, mate, a lot of blokes go through to this day.
Yeah, it's such an interesting bit of resistance. But I still feel it like today. There's been times in like recent weeks where I've not said something because I'm like, oh, like is this going to bring down the mood, or like am I going to get like taken the piss out for that? And it's like such a weird. Even though I know all the facts and I'm doing this podcast about it, I still feel it so strongly, like in group
Oh, mate,
situations, and it's yeah.
same, same. Like I like as mate, I completely resonate with what you're saying. As much as I put content out and do podcasts about men, you need to be open, you need to speak up. Like I'm still guilty of like on occasion holding things in and holding things back, just because that habit that I've built is so deeply ingrained from pretty much all of my life, except for the last couple of years where I have been a bit more open. That's still that habit is still there, and it's so easy to default straight back to that, just to say, oh well, I don't want to be a burden to anyone. I don't, I'll just keep this to myself and I'll deal with it myself. which, as we all know, is, I mean, for some people that works, but for the vast majority of us, as I'm sure you'd agree, it's not the best solution. So it's all about, the whole thing's a journey, man. It's all a process, and I guess it's just, at least we are sort of like consciously aware that we are doing that. I
Mm.
guess
And I guess what led you to? I can see Unbottled in the background. What led you to the podcast?
a couple of things really, mate. It was obviously the primary driving force behind it was I thought back to little old 18-year-old me, sort of on the train to work and just having no idea what was happening to him. And I thought, if I'd been exposed to content of other young lads talking about their experience in a very open and honest way, I think it would have made dealing with things a little bit easier. Um, I wouldn't have put off talking about it with my friends. I wouldn't have been so ashamed of what I was going through. All the typical things that we feel when we go through some kind of mental illness, and really my sole purpose and aim with it is for the 18-year-old lad that's sat on a train right now to work, trying to figure out what this feeling is, whether it's anxiety, depression, or anything, and really just have, you know, just just let him know that he's not alone, and just be that kind of, um, I don't even know, almost like a big brother figure, sort of like, like, it's all right, man. Like, I've gone through this as well, and here's what worked for me, and there's no need to feel ashamed about the way you feel. So that's kind of like the driving force behind the podcast, really, mate. And in some aspects as well, I guess there's also like a bit of a selfish element in there as well thrown in, because it is more often than not like a form of therapy for myself as well. When I'm doing these episodes and talking to these people, I've had some very deep and insightful conversations with some amazing people, and that does my head the world of good. And then obviously being at, because like I would be googling and YouTubing all this information anyway. So I kind of thought, well, I might as well just do it in a public way where other people can have access to this information as well. All these questions that I'm asking in the podcast and information that I'm trying to find out is just stuff that I'm really curious about knowing anyway. So I thought, why not just put it on a stage so that other people can see as well? And that's kind of the other component of it, is giving these amazing professionals like a platform really to share their knowledge and help other people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That is, yeah, that is just such a nice way to think about it. Like because it's often said in like psychology, right? We're trying to heal that kind of like inner child, and yeah, it's really nice that you've thought like that you can go back, whether it is also healing that your 18-year-old self that you've still got that feeling from, but also thinking about other young lads that are going through it and thinking if they can just hear one bit of information, it may cause them to have that conversation with their brother, their sister, their mum, their dad, and they can start to go on their own journey. But yeah, that is such a nice way of framing it.
Yeah, man, that's it. I mean, like, look, even if just one person is helped by it, I feel like I've done my job. You know, that's all it's about.
Yeah, and where's music come into this whole journey for you? I saw some cool bits on your Instagram page.
Yeah. So music's an interesting one, man. Again, talking from personal experience. So like when I've had some really low points in my life, for example, 18-year-old me, I'd often turn to music as a source of salvation. Yes, I'd be on the train. Yes, I'd be feeling all of these symptoms of a panic attack, but I'd have my headphones in and I'd be listening to some great music to try and sort of, take my mind to another place. And it's really a combination of being able to provide that to other people, and also like just writing lyrics is a massive form of therapy for me as well. Like, again, we internalize so much, and I find that when I sit down just in my room with the door shut, just me on my own with a piece of paper and a pen, and I just sort of, get writing. It's almost like journaling in a way, but like I'm just like pouring out everything that's going on in my mind. And then when you throw in the creative element of being able to throw that into like, some rhymes and stuff and create a song, like the entire process is just a massive form of therapy for me. Um, so that's kind of where the music comes from, really. It's like really just channeling everything that's going on inside my own mind into like this creative outlet and then being able to share that with the world. And like it honestly makes my week, never mind makes my day, when like, I get a message off someone like, these lyrics have really resonated with me, they're helping me through a bit of a rough time. Like that's, unbelievable for me to hear. So like that's what keeps me going as well, is again referring back to the 18-year-old kid that might be suffering at the moment, is, mate, you're not alone. Is Here's some rhymes to show you that you're not alone, you know.
And where do you want the music kind of route to go to? What's the plan?
Mm. It's a funny one, really, mate. Like with the whole like music industry, if that's what you want to call it, like it can be a really competitive environment. Kind of similar to social media, really, how like everyone sort of, gets caught up on like likes and followers and stuff, and like, obviously in the music industry, like, you first thing someone does is kind of refer to their streams, and like it's very easy to look at other people that are doing really well, and obviously, they've got a great audience, they're doing their thing, and they may be able to do music full time. So definitely, I'd be lying if I said that when I first started doing it, I didn't get caught in that trap, as most people do, is, that game of comparison. I'll be completely open and honest and transparent. Like I was, you compare yourself to all of the best artists out there, and I've kind of just got to a point with it, really, mate, where I'm just like, look, I'm just gonna do this from my heart, and if it goes somewhere, it goes somewhere. But I'm not gonna wake up every day and refresh my Spotify streams and see how many people have listened to a song, because it just takes the love for the art out of it. Do you know what I mean? So if I mean, like, I'm going on tour with a few mates next month, actually, who I've been making music with. Yeah, we're doing like Edinburgh, High Wycombe, Kent, and then we're doing the Jam House here in Birmingham. So it's basically, yeah. Thomas Atlas is the main guy, who like he was already going on tour. He does like sick music, man, like proper like funk rock, like really cool music. And me and my mate Eddie have made a few songs with him. And Tom just said, "Look, why don't you boys just come on the tour? We'll bring you out at the end of the show. We'll do a couple of songs together." Um, so like that's like, you know, that's sick, man. Like I never even thought that it would get to that point. Like, I only started putting music out like in February this year. So it's really cool that stuff like that's already starting to happen. Um, so like, yeah, just putting the music out there, just stuff that's coming from the heart, and if it resonates with people, it resonates with people, really.
Mm. Yeah, I want to try and like thread a needle with everything you're saying, because I think so many people don't follow what they like in like their heart and what they find their passions are or what they enjoy. Because I guess like the classic quote is comparison is a thief of all joy. And I was speaking to someone recently who was like, who started their own business, and they were like, of the people that started a business that I know at the same time, some have gone on to be international successes. They've made millions, and if I focused on what other people were doing, I wouldn't have done what I was going to do. And this has set up a life where I'm enjoying what I'm doing in the moment, and even if it's a failure, and even if it goes horribly wrong in the end, I will have done something which I'm not going to regret on my deathbed. And so many people don't do what you've done, which is follow passions or follow like things that you wanted to do, but you were potentially like scared. Oh, is anyone going to listen? Is anyone going to do this? But you've gone and done it anyway. I think so many people should just take a leaf out of your book and just go. if there is an interest and there's a passion, like just follow it, because there's so much enjoyment out of doing things you like.
There is, man. There is, and I appreciate your kind words, mate. But like in my experience, it really just boiled down to this. Like, obviously, I've kind of held myself back from like doing stuff like this like earlier in my life, and the pain, the pain of regret when I'm lying awake at 2 in the morning from not doing things based on the fear of how I'd be perceived by other people is to me far greater than going through the pain of, you know, the embarrassment. Because obviously, like, you know, when you first, like, the first time I put a song out, like, I know there would like there would have been loads of people, like, it would have been straight in group chats like, what the fuck's Mike Wells doing, like, all this sort of stuff. But like, I would sooner experience the pain of that than being, you know, wide awake at 2 in the morning and thinking, God, I stopped myself from doing that because I was so scared of what people were going to say. Um, that's just kind of like the view that I've tried to adopt with it all, really.
Mm. But I think that's what plays on a lot of people. I think that leads into a lot of anxiety, whether it's even like going for a promotion at work, whether it's doing anything. I think it's that little voice in the back of people's head, which is so worried about the fear of judgment. Like even with this, just to be like transparent, like I've definitely had wobbles recently. I'm like, this just isn't as good as the podcast that I listen to, and like having that real like, fuck, is this the right thing? Like, and then it's having conversations like this and the ones I've had so far that just make it so worthwhile. Like, fuck it, if only 5 people listen, then that would have been a win. Because you're not, yeah. It's
Exactly, 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 exactly. I was it's something I read the other day. I wish I could remember where the hell I read it, but like, it's definitely something I'm going to start trying to do more of, and it leads into exactly what you just said. And it was like, when you have like self doubt, and if you're anxious about, you know, pursuing something, for example, the podcast, or, you know, I'm not going to lie to you, mate, the thought of having going on this tour next month, as much as I'm excited, there's of course this voice at the back of my mind that's like, holy shit, Mike, you're going to be in front of hundreds of people, you know. But it was like reframing self doubt and anxiety about these things as a really, really good indicator that you're doing something that's true to your heart and that you're meant to do, because it's the current version of you desperately clinging on to staying where you are. And in order to become the person that you want to be, you have to shed that skin. And that skin is full of self doubt and anxiety. And yeah, it was like just a really powerful way of looking at self doubt and anxiety, because I was like, right, okay, this is just a necessary feeling that I have to go through in order to pursue the things that I want to pursue.
mhm. And I guess it comes back to that 1% framing you did before as well. That like when you do get stuck, just like what's the minimum thing you can do to move forward? What's like that even if it's just like having one more conversation with your boss, or like just sharing that you had an anxious day with your parents. Like you don't have to have this massive confession moment or this massive breakdown. It can just be one step. Um, and yeah, I really do hope more people do um, follow what they're interested in, and not just because you just don't want to be sitting there at 60 thinking, fuck, I wish I just done that in my 20s or 30s. I wish I just gone for it. Um,
It's a terrifying thought. It's a terrifying thought. And something leading back to that, like following what you're actually interested in, something that I am ridiculously guilty of doing earlier in my life is following things that I'm not interested at all, but because it pleases other people, um, I'll do it anyway. You know, like I used to in my early 20s, I was massively into the gym. Like I'd lift weights like 6 times a week, and the only reason I did that was so I could look great, so other people would say, "Oh, that's Mike Wells who lifts weights, and look how fucking hench he is." That was the sole reason that I did it, and like that's just an example of following an interest. I didn't really enjoy training, to be honest. Like, it got to a point where I found lifting weights ridiculously boring. Just in my personal experience, I still lift weights here and there, but I go on like runs, I do yoga, you know, the occasional like Thai boxing class. Like, I mix it up because it's not that I don't care about how I look. I just rather do things I'm interested in and that I enjoy. Um, so that's something I'm definitely guilty of doing, man. It's just doing things that I'm not interested in, but because it pleases other people, I'll do it until the cows come home.
And was that like an insecurity, or was it more like you enjoyed the validation from it, or a bit of both kind of thing?
Yeah, a bit of both, really, mate. It's a mad feeling when you're in your early 20s, you're still figuring out kind of a bit about who you are, figuring out life and everything. And this was when Instagram was just becoming like really popular. So of course you've got a bit of an ego about you at that age anyway. You think you know the world better than better than anyone else. You know, you put a topless picture on Instagram and hundreds of strangers are telling you how great you look. That's like crack cocaine, mate. Like, you know, you're gonna keep on pursuing that thing over and over again because that validation feels incredible. Um, and it took me a few years, man, to realize what the hell I was doing. And I think insecurity played a big role in that as well because I didn't really know who I was. I didn't really know what my interests were. Like this just felt like something that just validated that I did know anything about myself. Um, yeah, it was a crazy ride, man. Crazy ride.
Yeah, and do you still struggle with that? Like any like appearance insecurities, or is that kind of faded as you've kind of developed and grown?
Like okay, I think any of us will struggle to find a single person in the world that genuinely couldn't care less about what other people think of them. Like, of course, there's still, um, like previous in my life, I suffered quite bad with social anxiety as well around the same time when everything was going on with work. And like the idea of going into a room of people made me really, really anxious and stuff. Um, so, of course, to this day, there's still that tiny little element in my brain where it's like, I can hear it, I can hear it. Oh God, social environment, blah 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 blah. But I don't know, man. Like I've just gotten to a point now where it just feels like instead of being like the analogy I like to use is like imagine being in a room and like there's a cloud of social anxiety just suffocating me that I just can't escape. The point I feel like I'm at now is like I'm standing outside that room looking in through a window at that cloud of social anxiety. Like I can see it's there in my mind, but I don't need to pay any heed to it. And like I said, I think we all on some level care about what other people think of us. But if there's one thing that I've come to realize is just how self-invested every human being is. Like we all have conversations and stuff where we think, "Fuck, did I just actually say that?" But then the other person is thinking the exact same thing about the things that they've said. And the only thing that people really care about after a social interaction is how they came across themselves. And the more I came to realize that, just how like invested in ourselves that we really are when it comes to social interactions, that eased a lot of social anxiety for me as well. Because
That is a great way of kind of framing it. And I just thought recently, like I still find myself like the more time I spend on Instagram, the more time I'll start like judging myself, like my appearance, like have I gone to the gym enough, like all of this, and then that the way you described it before, that saying like so what is quite a powerful thing to do for insecurities as well. It's like, so what? Like, you've only got one body. Like, you've got to, you can either choose to address it, eat healthy and all that. But at the end of the day, like, so what? It's the people that are around you love you for who you are. And if anyone doesn't because of your appearance, and they can do one.
exactly, man, exactly, mate. And like the most ironic thing is that I would hedge a bet that the people on Instagram that are posting these pictures that make us all feel insecure and question ourselves can arguably be some of the most insecure people themselves because they're clinging on so much to get that validation that they feel the need to you know put these pictures up and in some cases edit them slightly so they'll get more likes. We can all edit a picture to make our six pack look a little bit more chiseled and things like that. And yeah, it's a wild game, man. Like social media, full stop, is like such a blessing and a curse. Obviously, the reason me and you both have the ability to create a podcast and put it out is because of social media and attract listeners and help people. But the flip side of it is the more darker side is that it's really, really hard to open Instagram and not compare yourself in some way, shape, or form to the things that you're seeing. Um, which I guess is just you've got to take it on the chin if you're going to be in this game of the online digital world and trying to do something like a podcast. Then you've just got to try and separate yourself from that, I guess. But it's hard.
I think it just needs more training. Like in the same way you should like learn how to drive a car, you should learn how to use social media because it's like going into a professional boxing match with no training. Like the algorithm's just going to find your insecurities and then show you more of it because you're spending more time engaging with it. And if you don't know how to have the self control and restrict yourself, then you're just going to get absolutely murked.
That's it, mate. That's it. And these algorithms know us better than we know ourselves.
mm. Yeah, it
It's
finds your
crazy.
darkest secret. Or there was a Facebook whistleblowing scandal where they Facebook have known about girls with eating disorders, young girls with eating disorders, start engaging in certain content, and then Facebook showing them more of it, and they knew about it internally, and it's just like it's a dark
But
place.
how can you morally work? Like, how can you morally go to work at that place every day with knowing that in your mind, man? That baffles me. That's disgusting, man. What the fuck? This is what we're up against, man.
Yeah, it's rough. But it's there's a lot of people out there, and I think a lot of parents now are conscious of it because people have spoken up, and I think there is a lot of positive movement. So I believe we can adapt it, and it's not the end of the world, and humans can get past it. But it's I'm just glad I
Yeah,
don't have kids at the moment because I'd be worried senseless about them using social media.
mate, I have this conversation with my mates all the time. Is like if I had a child now, because it's like you've got this paradox here where like, do you completely strip them of any sort of digital, any social media in that, but that to like protect them. But then the flip side of that is they're the freak in the class. Then see, are they just going to get bullied because they're the ones that don't have access to TikTok and everything? So it's like, where do you? But I think TJ Power spoke about this when he came on the podcast, which I think is a really good way of putting it. Is we're in like the infant stages of understanding social media and all this sort of stuff. Like it's not going anywhere. It's going to still be a big part of our lives forever. And I hope one day, mate, we will see, you know, guidelines come out and it's like, okay, children up into a certain age, X amount of time and then boom, their limits hit. Just more education just for people in general on the impact that social media can have. Um, I think as time goes on, more and more studies will be done. More and more people will understand maybe how it's affecting them. And yeah, I see a day where, you know, there's
To get through it,
heavily adhered to guidelines.
I hope so. I'm gonna wrap it up there, but I knew I was going to enjoy the conversation. But yeah, it's been amazing to have you on, and I think it's just so nice to see men speaking like you do about it, and really like genuinely caring about like your journey and how other people are perceiving themselves. And yeah, it's just been a great conversation. So thank you for coming on.
Nice one, Nick. I appreciate you having me on, mate. Looking forward to the episode being put out, man. And looking forward to seeing the whole podcast take off as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Never Fully Heard podcast. If you enjoyed it, please just share it with a friend. Would love to get this to as many people as possible. Thank you.